The winter blizzard descended like the wrath of a vengeful god, intent on obliterating everything in its path. My Lin could no longer distinguish the earth from the heavens. Walls of white snow assailed her face until her cheeks were numb, like frozen leather. Her traditional silk cheongsam, a garment meant for the temperate climes of Shanghai, was as useless as paper against the biting cold. Each inhalation was a searing pain in her lungs. Every step forward felt like wading through thick, wet cement. Her horse, Bao, stumbled once more, and this time did not rise. The sickening crack of its leg breaking would forever echo in her nightmares. She crawled to its side through the deepening snow, whispering an apology that was stolen by the shrieking wind. With a heavy heart, she turned away, forcing herself to continue moving. To stay meant to die. 3 weeks ago, she had fled Shanghai, carrying a modest inheritance and a letter from her great-uncle, Jin, a man she had never met but who had promised her a new beginning. Her parents were gone. Her cousin, Wei Shen, had schemed to seize everything, including dominion over her future. And so, she ran, crossing an ocean and a continent to the Montana Territory, praying the life that awaited her was real. Now, she doubted she would live to see it. Her legs finally gave way. She collapsed face-first into a snowbank that felt deceptively soft, almost welcoming. The cold began to envelop her like a soothing lullaby, and her eyelids grew heavy. It was then that she heard it, hoofbeats, cutting through the gale like thunderclaps. A shadow materialized out of the white chaos. A man on a colossal black steed rode toward her, a figure from a fever dream. His hat was pulled low, his heavy coat cloaked in a layer of snow. When he spoke, his voice was as rough as gravel. "You picked a bad day to die." He dismounted in one fluid motion and was suddenly crouching beside her. Up close, he seemed carved from stone, broad shoulders, a hard jaw, and pale grey eyes that missed nothing. "Where's your horse?" he asked. She could only lift a trembling hand, pointing back into the storm. He wasted no words. He pulled a thick wool blanket from his saddle and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders. The sudden warmth made her gasp. His hands were strong and certain as he hauled her to her feet. "Can you ride?" She nodded, though uncertainty plagued her. He mounted his horse first, then reached down and pulled her up in front of him as if she weighed nothing. His arm circled her waist, as solid as an iron band. "Name's Thorn Blackwood," he said, turning his horse back into the raging storm. "My ranch is close." "You're lucky I was out here." She leaned back against him, having no strength left to sit upright. The heat radiating from his body was a startling contrast to the profound cold that had seeped into her bones. "My Lin," she whispered. She felt him go still behind her, his arm tightening almost imperceptibly. After a long, tense silence, he asked, "Any relation to Jin?" "He's my great-uncle." Thorn said nothing more, but the atmosphere between them had shifted, growing heavier with unspoken thoughts. They soon reached his ranch, and Thorn carried her inside without a word of permission. A massive fire roared in a stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing light across the room. An older Chinese man with a white mustache leaped up from his chair. "Boss, what in the world?" "Found her near the ridge, half frozen," Thorn stated, setting her gently in a chair by the fire. The old man, Old Chen, hurried to fetch warm broth and coffee. Thorn knelt before her and pulled off her soaked, frozen slippers. His hands began to rub warmth back into her deathly pale feet with a gentle urgency that made her heart flutter. No man had ever touched her with such care. "You were headed to Jin's place?" Thorn asked, his gaze fixed on his task. "Yes," she whispered. Thorn paused. He lifted his eyes to meet hers, and she saw a darkness swirling within them. "No one told you." "He's dead. Died 6 months ago." The word struck her like a physical blow. Her one hope, her one sanctuary in this vast, unknown land, gone. Tears, hot against her frozen skin, streamed down her cheeks. "Storm's bad. You'll stay here for the night," Thorn said as he stood. But the weight of her predicament crushed her. She had nowhere to go, no money, and no family. She was utterly alone in a brutal territory that was indifferent to her survival. "I can work," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I can earn my keep. Please." Thorn stared at her for a long moment, his face an unreadable mask. "Fine," he said at last. "Chen, show her to the guest room." Later that night, wrapped in borrowed clothes that had belonged to Thorn's late wife, Mai Lin stood in the doorway of the great room. She was trembling, not from the cold, but from a profound fear. She had never been so vulnerable, so dependent on the kindness of strangers, so perilously close to losing everything. "My whole life, I've never even shared a bed," she whispered to the crackling fire, the words a confession of the solitary, guarded life she had led, never trusting anyone enough to be so helpless. Thorn turned slowly from the fireplace, the poker in his hand dropping to the floor with a loud clang. He walked toward her, his expression a mixture of emotion she couldn't decipher. Then, he spoke the words that would irrevocably alter both their lives. "Then share mine forever." Mai Lin felt the air leave her lungs. Thorn Blackwood stood before her, tall and unyielding, the firelight casting stark shadows across his rugged features, making him look even more formidable. "What?" she managed to choke out. "You need a name, a roof, and protection," Thorn said, his voice low and steady, as if he had already considered every angle. "This land is dangerous. People will come after you because of your uncle's property. A woman alone is easy prey out here." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I need a wife. This house is empty. The town talks. A marriage solves both our problems." Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. "A business arrangement?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied without a flicker of hesitation. "You get my name, my protection, my home. In exchange, you run the house." No other expectations. He let the words hang in the air between them. "You said you've never shared a bed. Then share mine forever, as my wife." She should have refused, run from the sheer madness of it all. But she had nowhere else to run. 2 weeks later, Mai Lin stood in the sheriff's office in the town of Redemption. A circuit judge read vows in a monotone voice. Thorn stood beside her, arms crossed, his jaw tight. There was no kiss, no smile, only a perfunctory nod when the judge declared them man and wife. Outside, the whispers of the townspeople followed them like shadows. Widow Blackwood took a wife. Pulled her out of a snowbank. Doesn't look too happy about it. Mai Lin kept her eyes fixed on the ground. Back at the ranch, Thorn moved her few belongings into the master bedroom. The bed was large, carved from dark, heavy wood. A faint, lingering scent of lavender hung in the air. "My wife sent," Thorn said quietly. "You take the bed. I'll use the cot in my study." And that was that. The weeks that followed were a silent blur of work. Mai Lin woke before dawn, helping old Chen in the kitchen. She mended clothes and learned the myriad chores of a ranch, tasks she could never have imagined back in Shanghai. Thorn was a phantom, leaving before sunrise and returning long after dark. He ate his meals in silence, spoke only when necessary, and slept every night in his study. Mai Lin felt like a ghost haunting her own marriage. Yet, sometimes she would catch him watching her. He would stand in the doorway as she stirred a pot of soup, his grey eyes inscrutable. On rare occasions, his hand would brush against hers as they reached for the same object, and he would tense as if he had touched a hot iron. She didn't know what to make of any of it. One afternoon, as she struggled to lift a heavy sack of flour, Thorn appeared silently behind her and took it with one hand. "You'll hurt yourself," he said, his voice quiet, almost gentle. Their fingers brushed, and she pulled her hand back as if startled. He set the sack down and walked away without another word, but that small, fleeting moment replayed in her mind all night. Then, trouble came knocking. A man named Silas Kane, big and mean-eyed, pushed his way into the great room with a contemptuous smirk. "Well, now, Blackwood. Heard you took yourself a new wife. Prettier than the last 1 inch. Mai Lin froze. Before she could react, Thorn crossed the room in 2 long strides. "If you ever speak my wife's name again," Thorn said, his voice as cold as a winter grave, "you'll be choking on your own teeth." Cain paled and backed out of the house in a hurry. Thorn didn't look at my Lynn afterward, but her heart beat faster. He had called her my wife, and every soul in the room knew he had meant it. Spring arrived, melting the snow and breathing life back into the valley. My Lynn found a friend in Limai, the blacksmith's daughter. "He looks at you sometimes," Limai said one afternoon as they sat mending clothes. "Like there's something he wants to say, but doesn't know how." My Lynn didn't know how to feel about Thorn. He was a paradox, distant yet kind, cold yet protective. He was both the storm and the shelter. Then, the darkness from her past found her. Two strangers in city suits stepped off the stagecoach, asking questions around town. Questions about Shanghai. Questions about a name that made her blood run cold, Wei-shen. When Limai brought her the news, my Lynn felt the world tilt on its axis. "Lynn, they're asking if you ran west to escape someone," Limai whispered, her eyes wide with concern. Her cousin had found her. 2 days later, my Lynn rode into town for supplies. As she stepped out of the general store, a man with a prominent scar on his face blocked her path. "Miss Lynn," he said with a chilling smile. "A long way from Shanghai, aren't you?" "You're mistaken," she said, her voice tight. "Oh, no. We know exactly who you are. Mr. Shen sent us to bring you home. He's a very determined man." "I am home," my Lynn said, forcing a steeliness into her voice she didn't feel. "And my name is Mrs. Blackwood." The man laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound, and reached for her arm. "I wouldn't do that." A low growl of a voice came from behind them. Thorn sat atop his black horse in the middle of the road, a rifle resting across his lap. "Step away from my wife." The words wrapped around my Lynn like a suit of armor. The man dropped his hand. His partner appeared from the shadows, but one look at Thorn told them he wasn't bluffing. "You've got until I count to 3, Thorn said calmly. 1. The men exchanged a nervous glance. 2. They backed away, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Thorn didn't lower the rifle until they were gone. "Get on your horse," he commanded. "We're going home." The ride back to the ranch was thick with a suffocating silence. Inside the house, Thorn finally turned on her, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Who is Wei-shen?" So she told him everything. About how her cousin tried to control her family's estate after her parents' death, how his behavior grew threatening and possessive, how she had fled across the world to escape him. When she finished, Thorn's face was dark with anger. "So you brought a war to my doorstep without telling me. You stood in front of a judge and took my name, and you never said a single word." "I was ashamed," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "And I was afraid." "That's not an excuse," he said sharply. "This ranch, this life, is built on trust. You broke that." His words cut deeper than any blade. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with conflict. "I don't know." The days that followed were cold in every sense. Thorn wasn't cruel, but he was distant, the space between them a vast, frozen chasm. And Wei-shen's men did not leave. They allied themselves with Silas Cain, spreading rumors and causing trouble. Fences were cut. Supplies went missing. Cattle vanished. The pressure mounted, tightening around them like a noose. One afternoon, my Lynn rode out alone to check on the sheep, a decision she made without telling Thorn. It was a grave mistake. Cain and 2 hired men appeared on the ridge above her. "Well, now," Cain called out, his voice dripping with malice. "Mrs. Blackwood, all by your lonesome." Fear, cold and sharp, shot through her. They circled her slowly, like predators cornering their prey. "I have a deed here," Cain said, pulling a set of papers from his coat. "You sign your uncle's land over to us, and this all ends. You go back to Shanghai, nice and easy." "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "That land is mine." Cain's eyes darkened. Fine. Then this won't be easy. He lunged for her horse's reins. My Lin kicked her horse hard, sending it bolting down the trail. The men gave chase. The terrain was steep and treacherous. Cain was gaining on her. She saw him draw his pistol, not to shoot her, but her horse. A single gunshot cracked the air. Cain's hat flew from his head. That was a warning. Thorn's voice thundered from a rocky ledge above them. He stood there, rifle trained squarely on Cain. The next one goes between your eyes. Cain didn't need a second warning. He and his men fled. Thorn scrambled down the rocks, his face a mixture of fury and terror. He grabbed My Lin's shoulders, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? No, she whispered. What were you thinking? He shouted, his carefully constructed control finally breaking. They could have killed you. It's my land, she cried, the tears finally coming. It's the only thing that's truly mine. Thorn stared at her, his breathing heavy and ragged. It's ours, he said, his voice raw with emotion. When you took my name, what's yours became mine, and what's mine became yours. His hands were shaking as he pulled her into a desperate, crushing embrace. Damn you, My Lin, he whispered into her hair. Damn you for making me feel this way. In that moment, the wall between them shattered into 1,000 pieces. But the fight was far from over. Wei Yishan himself arrived in redemption, bringing with him money, guns, and a plan to destroy them completely. Thorn and My Lin struck first. Using her father's old ledger, a book filled with proof that Wei Yishan had been embezzling from the family business for years, they went to the sheriff. Wei Yishan's men tried to stop them at gunpoint on the way into town, but Thorn fought them off, taking a bullet through his arm to shield My Lin. By sunrise, they rode out to confront Wei Yishan at the creek, where he was illegally damming the water that was the lifeblood of Thorn's ranch. Wei Yishan, the sheriff announced, riding up with a posse. You're under arrest for fraud and attempted murder. Panic flared in Wei Yishan's eyes. He pulled a small derringer from his coat and aimed it directly at My Lin. He never got the chance to fire. Thorn's bullet hit him first. Wei Yishan went down screaming, clutching a shattered wrist. It was over. As the deputies rounded up the remaining men, Thorn turned to My Lin. His arm was bleeding freely, but his eyes were warm in a way she had never seen before. Are you all right? He asked softly. She could only nod, tears of relief filling her eyes.